when I was a teenager and going out to see bands back then in clubs, they would have a lot of bands playing out the real book, just playing standards or sort of, and it just seemed so lame. But at the same time, I could really appreciate Coltrane and John McLaughlin and Weather Report and stuff like that.
Welcome to episode 73 of the Bass Shed Podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. Double bass players, everything you need for the double bass can be found at lemurmusic.com. Basses, bows, strings, sheet music, bass accessories, pickups, preamps, amps, bags, cases, everything you need for the double bass can be found lemurmusic.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off. Without a doubt, my favorite cables on the market are Tsunami cables. They come with a lifetime guarantee. That's right, buy the cable one time. Something goes wrong with it, talk to the folks over at Tsunami. They'll switch it out. Buy the cable once. Buy a Tsunami cable. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off. If you're like me and you bring upright and electric to the same gig, you're doing some doubling, check out the Trickfish Trilobite AB box and preamp. I love it. I use it all the time. Fantastic preamp. I also use their single channel preamp, the Minnow. I use that more for the home recording stuff that I do. But live, I use the Trickfish Trilobite exclusively. Check it out, trickfishamps.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off. On the episode is Sebastian Steinberg. Sebastian is a doubling bass player. He plays upright and electric. He is a founding member of the band Soul Coughing. Soul Coughing was a group from the early to mid 90s and had some hits titled Soundtrack to Mary and Super Bon Bon. Sebastian has recently worked as a session musician with Blake Mills, Fiona Apple, and the Watkins Family Hour. As a Fiona Apple fan, chatting with Sebastian was a lot of fun. We talk about Fiona's latest album release titled Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which Sebastian played on and co-produced. The conversation goes a lot of really fun places. We talk about Jimmy Blanton. We talk about jazz education. We talk about the Beatles. We talk about shifts in culture. We talk about his personal history as a bass player and what growing up in Boston was like and some things that inspired him about the bass, which are very, very interesting, actually. This was one of several podcast episodes that I know Sebastian is going to be on, and I feel like we just scratched the surface out of all the places the conversation could have went. So this is the first of most likely many of my talks with Sebastian Steinberg, but here it is. This is my talk with session bass player Sebastian Steinberg.
Hey there, I'm at a neighbor's because my scene at home is very low tech. So
okay, yeah, you mentioned that. Well, you mentioned there was like some kind of computer issue.
Standard computer issue.
Man, I'm kind of jealous of that. I wish I had a low maintenance tech rig over here.
Just don't update your shit for about 15 years, and that'll work.
That'd be great. It'd make podcasting difficult, but it'd be great. Man, thanks for doing this. Lawrence Ethan introduced me to you. What are you working on with Lawrence over there at East West?
Well, I mostly know Lawrence as lurker in the hallways. I think I've seen him around for a couple of years, but I was working on a thing with the Watkins Family Hour.
Okay.
Which is Sarah and Sean Watkins from Nickel Creek, who had a thing at Largo for a long time. And I've been their bass player for quite a while.
Okay.
And so we made an album very on the fly in 2015, just sort of over a weekend, and actually toured it and everything. So this is all of a sudden we're making a second album, but it's a very different style. It's much more produced and with guests and stuff.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Nickel Creek, correct me if I'm wrong, that's with Chris Thiele?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember that.
That's my birthday.
What's that?
He has my birthday,
Which is when?
February 20th.
Oh, for happy belated.
Oh, I thank you.
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain, Gloria Vanderbilt, a host of people.
Oh, wow. You're in good company then. Yeah. I know one person with my birthday, January 3rd. One of my old bass teachers. That's always been fun. That's cool, man. That's cool. I learned that you worked on the latest Fiona Apple record, which I would like to talk to you about. And I was checking out that record. And I still am a Fiona Apple fan, but when the first two records came out, Win the Pawn and Title, like I listened to those, just on repeat. I loved those records. Then there was a break, Extraordinary Machine, I checked out, but I was listening to other stuff at the time. So I went back and I was listening to this one that you worked on, which is Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I gotta say, now I don't know what she did in the middle between Extraordinary Machines and this. I haven't heard that. This is probably, I feel like, the best representation of Fiona that I've heard. I feel on this record, she has the freedom to be her. And it's there's some kind of exploration into maybe the avant-garde is like she would want to go. And it's really loose. Not musically loose, but it's very there's a rawness to it that is definitely obviously not on John Bryan records. And I really think I felt like she was able to shine her brightest on this record. I know you worked as a producer on this record, correct?
Yes.
Was it a cohesive production process with you and Fiona, or everybody in the band contributed producer?
Strap in. Well, first of all, yes, to answer that question, it was everybody in the band.
Okay.
There was no formal anything other than Fiona saying very early on, I want to form a band, her first band ever.
Okay.
Despite knowing all of us in varying ways over the years, she had never actually had a band before.
Okay.
So Fiona is one of the only Western contemporary pop artists I can say that has a completely genuine through line, where her first album is this stuff she just came up with, and then her manager producer guy came and assembled a band and orchestrations and sort of created something around that. And then she toured that, it blew up, Criminal, etc. And it was never again. I mean, and when she was done with that, she was like, the hell with this.
Okay.
I'm going to go take pictures and write and do other things. And then it was just because John Bryan was going through something and he called her up and said, help. So literally her albums have this through line where they're completely uninfluenced by each other. Mm-hmm. She goes and she tours and then she doesn't think about it. She doesn't sit around playing her tune. She's off rescuing dogs or doing something, real world, private world stuff. But that means that each album has grown and grown. I met her in sort of the John Bryan incarnation of Extraordinary Machine, which was just magic land, hearing these songs, which were all grown around Fiona cutting them with a click. Mm-hmm. And then John would orchestrate around it. It was just brain bending.
Yeah.
But each album, I think, gained a little more autonomy. I mean, the reason she went in another direction with Extraordinary Machine was she she loved that version, but she needed to just somehow, I think it just needed to be a pure expression in a way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Plus there was a bunch of other bullshit with the internet, etc. But then when she made the Idler Wheel, which was the first album I really got involved in.
Okay.
And I was one of like 4 people who knew it was being made because she's very hush hush. And that to me is still just such a gorgeous album because it's really, as Matt Chamberlain said, wow, that sounds like first Fiona Apple solo album.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to go back and check that out then.
No, seriously, you should. And it really dovetails so beautifully from the last song on that album into the first song.
Okay.
The whole vibe, because that's when Fiona really, she's always loved drums. And if you listen to her piano playing, it's super percussive.
Sure.
So she's just been a drummer all along. She just gradually gravitated more to the drums. And so this new album really did start with her assembling this little, who do I want in my band? And we all said yes.
Yeah.
And we all knew each other and loved each other. And it was unlike any band I've ever been in.
Okay.
In that we started from the ground up, from walking around her house, her little house, and just shaking things and chanting things. I mean, it sounds goofy, I know, but it, some of that stuff ended up on the album. Like the last song on the album.
Yeah.
On I Go.
Yeah.
One of the first things we did over there, where she just stomped around singing that over and over again. And we joined in. That recording is sort of a reorchestration of how we played her house.
Okay. What was the process of doing that and getting together over to her house and doing these kind of, I don't know what you would call them. I wouldn't say like a meditation circle or something, but you're really just connecting as musicians through music, kind of first before you're going in and hitting record. How long was that before you did go hit record?
I think a couple of months.
Okay.
I mean, there were a couple of songs, like the song Cosmonauts had sort of existed in a previous form that she had done with John Bryan for a soundtrack. So at one point she sort of like, I don't know if I should bring her here, try this, but it was a totally different thing. You can tell John had taken her and just re-harmonized the chords and done a whole different thing. But David Garza, who's a member of the band and who's this amazing musician from Austin and a whole story unto himself.
Yeah.
Hooked us up with this studio called Sonic Ranch.
Okay.
Oh, somebody's shaving toast, burnt toast out there.
I can hear it now. But
yeah, right.
I would have thought it was a gardener or something. That's some seriously burnt toast.
Well, it's a big piece of toast.
Okay.
It's the size of a driveway. But David had a hookup at this place, Sonic Ranch in Tornillo, Texas. And so we went there for a couple of weeks and just sort of we did not spend very much money at all. We just went and had the run of the joint.
Okay.
And just sort of grew a couple of songs, like probably about a third of the album was started there.
Okay.
And then everything was just getting back to LA, and there was no hurry. It was just the one thing we knew was this album was grown, not manufactured.
Right.
So things were just going to do what they do. And song by song, every song had a different story.
Okay.
The whole thing was one of the most natural and wonderful things I've ever done.
I love that. As a producer on the record, you specifically, as a member of this band that is producing with her, what do you felt like you specifically brought to the table for this record?
I think I did a lot of stuff on the floor as we recorded, just sort of band-ish. I mean, it would be song by song. I mean, I co-wrote the song Ladies.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think each song, I had a heavier hand in some songs than others, but it tended to be more stuff on the floor as we were recording.
Okay.
Or maybe just orchestrating it afterwards. And then David sort of in a similar way, but in a more sort of ghostly way, just little suggestions here and there.
Sure.
Seriously, David Garza, check him out, folks.
Yeah.
And then Amy, the drummer, and Fiona, like Amy did the real hands-on, much more engineering, magic post recording, real working with Fiona and did some of the real heavy lifting.
Okay.
Production wise. So sort of like, but it depends on what song. Some songs
Okay. I mean, I feel like that's always the best way to work, is having this collaborative process where you have all these different ideas, because you have one person who's, really steering the ship, and then all the ideas, they're all kind of like, I don't know, insulated or something. They're all coming from this one person with this one view on the thing. And that can be harmful and detrimental to what a project could be.
Well, bands are so often just these dysfunctional little families that happen to make this really cool thing that no one else can make.
Yeah.
But, it's always just like, the runt, the bully, the king, soul coughing. That's another story. But
sure.
We kind of.
I was going to get there. Yeah, let's go.
Well,
I'm still buckled in. Let's make it happen.
Because Fetch the Bolt Cutters, one of the strangest things about that was, for the first time since Soul Coughing's first album, I was just getting to say stuff on bass that just felt in a context that had never happened before. Without being specifically exotic or trying to make anything weird. We were just... It was getting to do a kind of bass playing and having a voice on bass that I hadn't felt since we finished, Soul Coughing, got the rough mixes for Ruby Vroom, and just holy shit, we caught it. So to Soul Coughing. Yeah.
Let's go. So you're a founding member of Soul Coughing.
We all were.
Okay. Then you never switched out anybody.
No.
I think growing up and listening to that music, when I was young and listening to that, I probably thought it was Cake. Like, I've got to apologize to you. You're the person, one of the people to apologize to for that. I would listen to it like, this sounds like Cake.
How old were you, by the way? Like, what age were you when you were?
Oh, wow. What year was that first hit?
I don't know. What was our first hit?
I had it up here earlier. Let me pull it back up.
Well, like,
how old, I think.
Okay, how old were you, like, in 94, 95?
94, 95. 95, I was... Okay. I remember being in 5th grade when Clinton got elected in 92. Because we watched the inauguration. So
fair enough.
Like,
I mean,
8th grade.
Yeah, right. If I, asked me some shit about 8th grade about a band I heard.
Yeah. Like, and I think at the time I was listening to like Duke Ellington and Stanley Clarke or something too. So I was trying to figure all that out. Yeah, I was all over the place. Man.
I love Jimmy Blanton.
Dude, Blanton.
Right?
Blanton, that's a topic. That's a topic. Let's talk about Jimmy Blanton. We'll come back to Soul Coughing. I want to talk to you about Jimmy Blanton.
Yeah. By the way, is nursing okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry, folks.
So what's your history studying jazz? What's as a bass player yourself, before we get into jazz history and Blanton? Did you study jazz?
I didn't study anything really other than just records I listened to and liked. I've started playing electric bass first. So, I mean, literally, I had about 5 lessons. A guy showing me how to play Black Dog, Day Tripper, and a couple other things. But jazz just was around because I grew up with Fats Waller, like that, and just that swing feel.
Yeah.
And I was also listening to records of Steam Trains.
Okay.
And there's a real connection between swing rhythms and sort of basically grooves in general and the contemporary technology of the time. So if you listen to Count Basie Band, think about it.
Yeah.
Page.
Sure.
That's how they were doing it. They were like walking a steam train.
Yeah.
And then when it switched to diesel and jet engines, anyway, that's another topic, but it really is. Actually, it is relevant. I mean, because I really was connecting the two without really thinking about it. And,
okay.
And so it was just never something that felt like needed to be formally studied.
Yeah.
And I grew up, I was living in Boston at the time, and there was Berkeley and the New England Conservatory. And, when I was a teenager and going out to see bands back then in clubs, they would have a lot of bands playing out of the real book, just playing standards or sort of, and it just seemed so lame. Like but at the same time, I could really appreciate Coltrane and John McLaughlin and Weather Report and stuff like that, because they knew what not to play and they had something to say. But just the idea of getting up there and reading it out of a book seemed, it didn't mean I didn't occasionally hear something wonderful, but it didn't interest me as a way to go. But at the same time, I'd go and do jazz jam sessions because my ear and hand things seemed to be good enough.
Okay, they were working together. Yeah, the ears and the hands. Yeah, great.
So it's just an intuitive thing.
Yeah, okay. I do think that, there's a thing, because you referenced, Weather Report and Coltrane right now. Those were bands, and this kind of circles back to what you were talking about with Fiona and Soul Coughing. There's a synergy that happens in a band that will never happen when you just, you go out to the Baked Potato and you hear all these A-list names reading charts. Well, they're not a band. They're just a bunch of great players. There's a disconnect there still. I think, there's something to playing with the same people regularly and knowing, being in touch with everybody's thing, and knowing, as a bass player, knowing where your space within their thing is, that can't be duplicated any other way. It's just really, you have to put in the time with the people. And that's where magic, I do believe, happens. It's through
with the good bands. Hell yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So Jimmy Blanton, what was the first records you heard Blanton on?
When I was probably 15 or 16, and just like deep into sneaking into jazz clubs, just the whole, I found it. There was some, the jazz bin, there was this box set called The Bass. Okay. This full color picture of what turned out to be Jimmy Garrison, but you don't see his head. You just see an upright bass in these hands. Okay. It's an amazing picture. And it was a double out or a triple album set of just a collection of what whoever put this thing together considered innovative and developmental bass. And it started with Jimmy Blanton. Yeah. I'd heard Jimmy Garrison a lot, and I sort of heard some stuff, but I'd never heard anything quite like that. Just it was like speaking, it was like a horn, but it felt like bass too. And especially when he was walking, I was just, my God. Yeah. Yeah. Just so huge clear sound on the walking lines, and then so lyrical on the solo stuff. And this is around the time where they just started kind of walking. Walking lines just kind of started happening. The transition between tuba and bass, they'd still have Bose in the band or guys with double. And all of a sudden he's doing this, and he's at the forefront of the stage with Ellington and Webster. And he blew the lid off the whole thing. Whole thing. And I kind of get pissed that so many people within the bass world kind of go back to Ray Brown and stop at Ray Brown. Now, Ray set a standard. Ray absolutely set a standard, and I'm not by no means speaking against the brilliance of Ray Brown. But it's just okay, get your Ray Brown together, and then you're good. Well, okay, Brown got his thing from Blanton. Go back to Blanton. Everybody just needs to go all the way back to Blanton. The thing is, Blanton was so lyrical. Yeah. He and Charlie Christian shared this just... once they said it, it sounded like it had always been there. It's just the great story of it, but nothing extraneous, just all the right notes. Yeah. And it's still, I think that's one of the reasons they both sound so contemporary to me. Sure. It's only after you listen to a bunch of stuff after a while do you realize there's certain articulations they hadn't gotten to yet, right. Or later developments, but just what they're saying, the stories they're telling, they make perfect sense. Absolutely. And they tell it so beautifully and so elegantly. So yeah.
I agree. So how long had you been playing electric before you got into double bass?
Probably 3 or 4 years. I started playing electric when I was like 12, and then
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I think I first encountered one in a junior high. So I was like, what? Yeah, 14.
Right. Like in the orchestra, or just there's an old one in the
Oh.
band room?
It was in the band room, but I just after hours hanging out with a piano player, and there may have been marijuana involved. I'm not sure.
Well, there might have been. There might have been.
But there was a room. We just kind of had the run of the place, and there was this room with a piano and like 3 upright basses.
Yeah.
Because those were the days when. Right. And I just remember picking one up and just kind of flailing on it for a while. And I knew enough about bass to sort of knew. I was surprised I could actually just kind of, it wasn't as foreign an experience as I thought it was going to be.
Sure.
Although my right hand was in shreds. That I learned the hard way. Oh, blisters.
Yeah.
But, and then I bought my first one in high school from a fellow who gave me my one and only upright lesson, which was, I think you're not supposed to look too much at your left hand.
Yeah.
Which was the best advice I've ever gotten.
That's one of my favorite lessons as an upright player was when a teacher told me to focus on a place, like just focus on a spot on the wall and play the same thing again. Just don't look at the bass. Like focus here and listen. And that was probably my favorite, most impactful lesson. That alone, like just averting attention and learning to trust your ears, I think those are huge.
Yeah, I mean that was really the only way I played music. I've never really been. I've learned to read certain things by osmosis, but I've to my occasional detriment, really just don't do that or don't do it well enough to make it a very super practical thing in my repertoire.
Right.
But my ears, and that's the way in.
Sure.
There's a really great quote I always invoke or think about from Neil Young, which I'm going to butcher completely, but
sorry.
It's an interview Neil Young did in the New York Times, and the subject of his guitar playing came up. And he sort of said, well, I think of it kind of as there's this wall, and on this side, there's scales and tuning, but on the other side, that's where the trains and the thunder and et cetera. And I was like, yeah, that's where I started out. And I sort of worked my way, but I recognize exactly what he's talking about.
Okay.
And I started over there and just kind of clawed my way over the mountain.
I mean, I think the process you're speaking of is starting on that side of the wall with the trains and this kind of organic thing and learning and to trust your ears. That's the better way to start, because you could learn how to read music. That's just a skill. Like, okay, great. Now I can do it. It's like learning Italian or something. Great. Now I can speak it.
Speak Italian?
What? Are you speaking to me in Italian? I didn't say I've learned it. I just said you could learn it.
I guess exactly. Yeah. Precisely.
But so that's just a skill. But I mean, the ear thing, like that's the nature of it all, is how does it sound? How does it sound? How do you feel when you hear that? Like those things, having that as the foundation is, that's amazing.
Well, it's funny. There's all this sort of mysticism built up around the idea of improvisation and things. And it's like everybody does it. It's just nobody really, if you ever heard of a conversation.
Yeah.
You don't go into a conversation knowing every single thing you're going to say.
Right.
And it's just reactive thinking, and trying to listen is one of the biggest part of it. Yeah,
I agree. I think this could maybe get off on a weird tangent about improvisation, but I think that
if you want to go, baby, it's your time.
I think that music becoming institutionalized, and probably the institution of jazz education is bigger than jazz music itself at this point. They need to sell their goods. They need to sell the books, and people need a place to teach, So they have to keep this business happening.
I think that's it.
So you got to learn these licks and do this thing. Like, all right, if you can go back to any one of the guys that you're probably going to transcribe or listen to or learn the lick from, there's a good chance they didn't do that. They just bought records.
That's what, I know. I mean, I remember visiting my friends at Berkeley, just going to hang out because I would go jam over there all the time, but I'm the townie.
Okay.
And the Brainiacs, and just seeing this dude's transcription of a Coltrane solo.
Yeah.
And sort of, it's fun to read along with, but thinking, okay, so do you learn? I mean, I get it. It's a fun exercise to learn how to pick things out of the air. But then the idea of transcribing like a bass solo and learning it to me is frankly, madness. I've never been an academic person. I've never fit into that situation well at all, in regular world or music. So it's not ever been something I've been too worried about.
Did you, were either of your parents academics or in academia?
Well, my dad did music history. He taught music history for a while, and he was a classical music critic.
Okay.
And a really a great writer, very articulate and knowledgeable. One of sort of the first classical critics who sort of weren't just PR, but actually had. Well, so it's a great. I mean, So I had that around, but I was never pressured to be a part of it.
Sure. And you didn't kind of grow up wanting to duplicate what was familiar either. Because I feel like that's a normal thing. Like, oh, I grew up in a house. This is normal. I want to follow in this to some degree because I've just been around it my whole life.
Oh, yeah. No, it wasn't that kind of a house anyway. I mean, my parents were what you would have to probably call bohemians, simply meaning that they were kind of into having fun and not really worrying about what other people thought about it. But It was nothing crazy. But just, my mom was exploring dyeing fabrics and stuff, and cooking. And my dad's doing this crazy gig that he had to travel all the time, but really deep into this other world. And so I got to go see a lot of classical music, which was wonderful, but it was never a sense, there was no role model type thing.
Okay.
And the other wonderful thing was when it was clear that that's what I was going to be, because I believe I was a strange child. I think they were really happy and relieved.
Yeah.
It does something.
Yeah.
And they really, without any reservation, trusted me completely. Like there was
great.
Up from the day one, like a sense of trust.
Yeah.
And my dad, who's this classical music dude, and not a very super emotionally demonstrative person, yet warm, but just, I was one day just like, my thing was, I just played along with records. That's how I learned to play bass. Mm-hmm. So one day was playing along with Grand Funk Alive.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of the song, but it's about half an hour of one bass line that's just this ostinato.
Yeah.
While a bunch of back and forth, but just
holding it down. Yeah.
Faster than I'm singing it because it's been 100 years. But I'm playing it, along and just kind of this record, and the door peeps open, and my dad is just like,
yeah. All right.
Into a hell of a bass player.
Yeah. He got
I swear, man, that moment got me through some dark times.
Yeah.
So it's just, they didn't, there was no expectation for me to be any pre-existing model because there weren't any then.
Yeah. Was it primarily classical music that was played around the house? Or were you exposed to a lot of different things musically?
Classical music, Fats Waller, and the Beatles.
Okay.
That was sort of the three things that were really going on.
That's a strong, diversified,
And then The Who. Discovering Tommy by The Who, and then John Entwistle was my first holy fuck bass hero.
Yeah. I didn't really start checking him out till later.
Oh man,
unfortunately.
And the funny thing was the moment that turned me on to him was not a shredding moment at all. But there's a song called Amazing Journey It's this incredible Keith Moon thing. And then it goes to a song called Sparks that literally starts with just an acoustic guitar and an open E string. And it's roto sound, open E, like I want to do whatever that is.
Yeah.
But that, you know, just this visual sound like this, it was bigger than a sound.
Right, sure. Was that what got you into playing the bass, your first electric bass? Was it hearing those records and being like, ding, 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 the light bulb goes off?
Well, I mean, it's, I think so. I mean, no, there's just moments of, okay, I mean, my evolution of bass awareness is probably the best way to tackle this because, you know, music's a thing and I'm like a kid and it's the Beatles. And then there's this song called I'm a Loser, which is this really basically kind of a country rockabilly song if you had to. But the chorus has my first walking bass line that isn't in a Fats Waller content. And it's just a oh do 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 do. And I remember just the way it goes with the drums and the way it felt. And that was the first moment where I was like, hey, what is that? Yeah. And my mom said, that's an electric bass. And then just somehow knowing that was kind of the future of my life. Yeah. And then a woman in 5th grade came into the classroom to demonstrate a cello. She was like a couple of grades older, or maybe it was 4th grade. And I remember, you know, she bowed a little bit, but it was when she just hit the open string, the bottom strings on a cello. And I was like, yeah, what that there? Something.
Yeah. What are we doing with that one? I like that one.
Yeah, that. And then the Youngbloods. Do you know the Youngbloods?
No.
So the Youngbloods are this band. Come on, people now.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, they were this weird little quartet, and the bass player was actually this Bay Area songwriter, but he just got thrown on bass. And there's just this jam where they basically go into a blues. And I remember, again, there's this walking bass line, and, you know, listening to it now, they're just clearly in there and stoned as fuck, and they've got this song and it goes off and they freeform. But yeah, the tactile sensation of just what a walking bass line did. Yeah. You know, more than is that a dominant 7 or 8? You know, I don't know such stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think it was almost like a synesthetic sort of sensation. You know, synesthesia. You know what that is? No. That is when you see smells and hear colors. It's okay. Yeah. A lot of musicians, I think, have formula. Fiona. Yeah. I do.
I think I was listening to an interview with Billie Eilish, and she was talking about that not long ago. No. And I was thinking about that after I heard her speak of it. And I don't think I have it to the degree that she was talking about it. You know, like everything to me is kind of like a skit. Like everything's a character. And so like everything has this, like everything has a very specific vocabulary, and sometimes the vocabulary can be a color, or sometimes it's kind of this person and they look a certain way or act a certain way.
It's associative thinking.
Yeah, but I associate everything. It's like this kind of visual skit all the time.
Yeah, that works. Same thing. I think it's very common. I think a lot of musicians, I think it's how you take stuff in. I think it's how you actualize it, how you internalize it. You know, when I was playing with sorry, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to ask real quick about this. What was the correct scientific word? Synesthesia?
Synesthesia.
You have to look it up. Yeah, okay. I'm going to spell that wrong 1,000 times before I wonder if that's...
You know, when senses, just, you know, when you smell colors, just start describing symptoms and see what comes up on the old Google.
Yeah. I've thought a lot about that about myself and how I think and process information. I've always wondered if it's like I just have to put it in a context that I can understand. Like I can put life elements into a musical context, and if I can put them into a musical context, I can understand it because I understand this world. You know, as much as anybody can understand music, which is not tangible. But I can understand it. You know, I kind of know the quote unquote rules of music and the characteristics of things and stuff. So my mind, I think, just puts it into places that it can compartmentalize and wrap my head around it. Because otherwise, you know, another existential crisis would happen.
Yay.
Yeah. It's Tuesday. It's time for an existential crisis. Where were we? Did we just... Okay, here's where I wanted to go.
You went off, man.
Favorite Beatles record?
Pretty much all of them. I mean, there weren't any that sucked. You know, that was the fun thing. Like, I was still the exact right age for each one that came in. Mm-hmm. We got them also because my dad, being a music critic, got all the promo things. Cool. We get shit from Capitol and... they all worked great. And it was amazing because they were back to Fiona. That was my first introduction to a band being able to make these increasingly more powerful albums, like an album being this really new format, you know, and this physical thing, you pick it up and you turn it over to hear the other side. And you're involved with it, and it's got a cover you can hold that's big, not some bullshit on a screen. So you were really involved. So each album got more and more rewarding. So I was like, I don't know, was I like 9 or something when Sgt. Pepper's came out? And, and just, you know, going, what the? Or no, I was younger than that. I was like 7.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, I'd already been into, like, they moved so fast. But when you were a little kid, it was, they moved at the exact right speed. But by the time, you know, Sgt. Pepper's came out, wait a minute, the Beatles have mustaches? Come on, wearing glasses? But yeah, I mean, they were easy to follow. Yeah, there was never a moment where I had to break up with them.
Sure.
Which actually is an interesting thing, because thinking back to what we were talking about, bands and all the bands, because I'm sure you can, well, maybe you can relate. I hope you can relate, but you know, having these intensely personal and private relationships with bands, which for me, the Beatles weren't that, because everybody knew the Beatles. They were just part of everywhere you went and everything you heard, or at least when I was a kid, they were. Yeah, and then everybody trying to be them. So it wasn't just like the Beatles. I mean, it was like the Beatles. Then you have all the Beatles knockoffs. You know, I mean, it all works. The Temptations. I think I found this version of the Temptations cutting "Come Together." You know, because Berry Gordy was trying to ride the Beatles train. Oh no, it's like, man, let's let the Beatles be the Beatles. But you couldn't. It was like getting to know musicians from that era, actually. And sort of understand, it was just like this, suddenly that's where everything went. So we were negotiating, and the songs were great, or at least some of them were. So you couldn't help it. It was just something you couldn't ignore. And the world was a much different place. So you didn't have all these other conduits like the internet. Sure. I think the world was very similar to what has happened in the last few years. I mean, if you go back to like... How so? Great set. Because I mean, it seems like well, I mean, there's another war going on. We're not involved in it, and it's not as tumultuous as Vietnam. Well, it depends. You know, the race struggle. The race struggle was really was at the forefront of the media. You know, a few years ago. But during the pandemic and all that shit, I felt like it was a couple things. There's like the Spanish flu from whenever that was, the last pandemic we had that, you know, none of us were around for because it was 100 years ago. What do you mean?
Yeah, I was there. I had a gig that night.
Hell yeah. Calculation.
No one showed up. Still paid $50. Yeah, I feel like so many of the issues that were things back then, if you take out technology, the humans are still the same. You just add this other element to it now because it's technology, so it looks different, and it's glossed over in a different way because of technology. But I think so much of the humanity of those times, when the Beatles, to bring this back to the Beatles, when the Beatles were coming up and kind of making
profound differences, and the technology really does take most of the blame, because
absolutely. This is absolutely something I want to talk to you about because of Soul Coffee in the 90s.
Channels on television, if you had a TV, which I did not. I didn't have a TV till it was not it wasn't a factor for me, but just, there were the 3 channels on television. There was whatever they showed. There were a couple of things on the radio. There was the AM dial and there was the FM dial. The FM dial back then wasn't even a factor.
Yeah.
That was just what was on the radio, what was on the record shelves at home, and what was on everybody else's TV. And Vietnam was something you couldn't ignore.
Exactly.
You couldn't be distracted by your own little thing. You couldn't be, it was everywhere. And that is how there was a much more unified thing. I mean, the thing with, it's just a lot more distraction. So the playing field just got kind of warped. So it's a whole cultural thing, but it has being of an age where I do actually remember how different an album was as an experience and as a community experience.
Yeah.
Back then, when there was no leaking, there was no way to hear it if it was leaked. You didn't, the best you could hope for was the night before on a radio station, a hip radio station. And no.
Yeah.
But seriously, there was no real way to, you were in the thrall of it. And the only information you had was the record jacket.
Yeah.
That was it, you know, or going to see him live.
Sure.
And so the power was huge. I mean, the impact, that's why bands from those days that are still alive just had this kind of aura about them. And just, it all got diffracted into smaller and smaller chunks, smaller and smaller attention spans. Some wonderful things happened, but the element of, even a real basic element of technology and excitement, primal energy of being at a rock show when it was a brand new thing and the technology hadn't caught up with it, meaning the PAs and the amps were doing things they'd never been asked to do.
Yeah.
There's something that happens there because that generates something in you that hearing everything pristinely takes away.
Yeah.
And it's a very visceral, primal thing. There's some amazing footage of the Stones playing at some college in the 60s and Brian Jones. And it's just one of those gigs where they were hitting real hard and the crowd, as always, just rushes the stage and tears them apart. And it's worth watching because you hear, this is a public address system. It's not a rock sound system.
Right.
This is some amps on stage. These amps, pumped up to throw into the crowd. The way drums sounded in a hall before there were a million mics on, before there were sound checks. You didn't, monitors. What you lose in definition, you gain in energy. And the more defined and articulate it becomes. That's what happened in jazz.
Yeah.
Sort of the scholarly thing and trying to just make it more about minutiae and it just, and formalizing. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
what were we talking about?
Yeah.
Bland's great.
On this topic of cultural change and shifts, Soul Coughing what, 96? I think somehow we had started there, and then I started talking about I don't know what. 96 is when the first
we
record
started in 93.
93.
Our first album came out in, I think, 94. Second one in 96. A third one in 98. By 99, we were barely hanging on, and we were done.
I think that the 90s was the last great decade for music.
Aww.
So, and now somebody is probably going to send me an email about this, but let me finish my rant first. Back then, there were bands and artists talking about the culture that they were in. They were talking about their lives. They were telling stories about their lives, and it was pre-internet. It wasn't all this run together information. Right now I can access any bit of information I want to, and it lives in my pocket on my phone. Right? Information is so together, and music is the same way. All music is kind of they've all combined forces at some point. Like the idea of genre.
Not all.
Fair.
But
you're right.
Pop culture.
Yeah, pop culture. Yes.
Anyway, yeah, go. I know what you're saying.
But I love the 90s because it was, if you listen to the quote unquote alternative station, you could hear everything from Nirvana to Soul Coughing to Fiona, whoever else might have been around at the time, Jacob Dylan, the Toadies, Sponge, the Chili Peppers, and everybody was very, no, I only liked them when they had Navarro. No, I only liked them when they had this guy on guitar. That was a 90s topic. But all that, and it was all, the music was so different. Everybody was so different, and I loved that because it had more of an identity, more of an artistic identity. That's where I'm at. That's the topic: artistic identity of the 90s. Artistic, go.
Okay. Again, technology, I think, is a huge factor because back then, that was sort of the last era. There was internet.
Exactly.
But it wasn't everywhere. It was at home, and it was slow.
Right.
And you had to hope no one else was on the phone or some shit.
Right.
So you had to work harder to find your stuff. If you wanted to, like I was into Fela Kuti. So when I could go online, I had to go scour record stores everywhere.
I love that. I love that.
So you had to find your own way.
Yeah.
You didn't have the distraction of having access to everything. Everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. The same everything that everybody else has the access to, unless you have the imagination to have a specific interest or looking at something. And then it's a gold mine. It's wonderful. Yeah. The point being, you weren't distracted.
Right. So,
New York City or Boston back then, New York was, ATMs were still just getting there. Starbucks were still just showing up. You had to talk to people when you saw them on the street. That's how bands, That's how bands got formed. That's how gigs got booked.
Yeah.
That was how it worked. You didn't stay in your apartment unless it was winter and it was too cold to go out. And then you went to a cafe and you talked to the people around you.
Yeah.
And I'm not exaggerating. Bands, I can think of 3 gigs off the top of my head that got booked at the Knitting Factory.
Okay.
But chance encounters on the street. So that doesn't, that's why, it was sort of the last tribal era where you got a chance to actually interact with the world around you.
Sure.
As opposed to having access to everything and knowledge of nothing.
Sure. I do think it's all that. I agree with all you said. And then to add another layer to it, you have recording technology and how inexpensive recording technology is. Anybody can have a home studio now. You don't have to pay whatever, $1,000 a day to book out a few hours at the studio and make sure that your band's super on point. Because man, we only have 4 hours, so don't suck. We're gonna rehearse for months and then go in there and now if it doesn't,
well, it's
what are you just chopping it up in Pro Tools?
What Pro Tools brought in, and it was interesting because as Soul Coughing was first forming, Mark, the keyboard player, the first time I ever heard of Pro Tools, he was one of the first engineers to work on he was working as a classical engineer and editor.
Okay.
And it was a gas. It was really amazing. But again, it took away from performance. Mm-hmm. You stopped having to be a performer. Like as technology advanced, as the more tracks you had, the less all y'all had to do to nail it. And you had the luxury of going it. And I can say, at least in my recording experience, these days, it's gone back to being in the same room and getting it and not messing with it and not having, you have options if you have to chop something together, if there's an irredeemable flaw, but performance and synergy between players and mistakes occasionally have at least become an accepted part of the culture again. I'm happy to say, at least in some small culture. I don't traffic in the fancy pants shit. I don't get those calls. And I have some friends who do work up in and it's not to in any way say that everybody huge is awful, because I don't think that at all, but it's not my language. And it's such a specific kind of thing. It's one of the ironies of Fetch the Bolt Cutters coming out and making a splash was we weren't thinking about anybody else hearing it at all until we finally finished it, sequenced it, got the mixes back and listened to it, and then realized, oh shit, that's going out in the world. Okay. Well, some people are going to dig it, and there's going to be some people going, I don't know what that is, but good luck to them. There you go.
I got to work on a record one time that, to go back to the Beatles, Jeff Emmerich, who engineered the White Album, all that stuff. What did he do? White Album, Revolver, I think Sgt. Pepper's, and one other one I forgot. There's 4 of them.
Yeah.
So we were recording in Burbank, and that studio, big console, but it's basically all Pro Tools. And Jeff was just standing there. Jeff doesn't do Pro Tools. Since then, Jeff has passed away, and that's a big loss for the music community. But he didn't know Pro Tools, and he was just there to be the guy for ideas. He was producing the record and ideas, and to sign off on what the take was. Yeah, his ears, and what he looked for versus what younger guys who are married to technology look for. Drastically different things. And I loved just watching him work, and he'd say something, and I was always kind of interested in why he chose that, or why he chose to let something exist. If there was a flub or something, he's like, man, it's all about this one big feel. You gotta, I'll know it when I hear it. It's just one. That's it, man. That's it. Because that's what the listener's going to do. The listener is probably not,
Yeah, they don't give a goddamn about the kick drum.
No.
It's the hair on your arm. Right. The thing that's
they don't care what frequencies were notched, on a floor tom. And it was great. I really liked that old world, so to speak, an older time version of it all. I recently got into vinyl to go through the process you were talking about, to make it apart. Yeah, pick it up, do the thing, go out and go to record stores and flip through them
and have an active list. You have to get up and turn the motherfucker over. You can't. It's not going to do it itself, pal.
Yeah. I was putting one back in the sleeve yesterday, and it just wasn't going back in the sleeve, and I'm just no wonder MP3s are a thing. It's a pain in the ass.
And some didn't. You can tell. Speaking of which, one last thing, because I'm imagining we must be closing in on. I don't know.
Can be. I feel like you're going to have to come back at some point, because
I'd be happy to. I'll come back as many times as you want, because we can go in
this could go for
First 2 words: Fred Hopkins.
Okay.
Bass player, Chicago cat, played with the original band called Air Chicago, but he studied with Jimmy Garrison, and he's just, as an upright player, a voice unto himself.
Fred Tompkins?
There was a band called Air. There was a trio. Henry Threadgill played saxophone and wrote a lot of the stuff. And one of the greatest drummers that ever lived, Steve McCall, and Hopkins was the bass player. And so Fred Hopkins.
Was he mainly a Chicago guy? Did he ever go to New York?
I'm going to look this guy up.
Okay.
Ended up in New York. And I'm I'm planting a seed. I'm not going to go into, that's a future subject.
Yeah. We'll come back to this on Sebastian Volume 7 of the podcast. Right. Yeah. No. That's a joke about me being
any bass player who doesn't know who Fred Hopkins is, especially if you play upright, check out Fred Hopkins.
Okay.
But just back to what you were saying, the new, how the performances were unconventional. They hadn't been formalized what the guy was listening to in a performance versus what. Have you listened to the song Help lately?
No.
By the Beatles?
No.
I just heard this thing, and I grew up with that song, and I've never heard this before, realized this before, but listen to it and check out the kick drum.
Okay.
I'll give you a hint. There almost isn't any. He does it like at the top of the song with the helps. Yeah. And then on the verse, he's not even doing it. He brings it in at the chorus. He does, I think, at the end of each phrase. But there's a YouTube video where they break down, they have the multi-tracks of various Beatles songs.
Oh.
And check out Help. Listen to how Ringo plays that song and rethink how you play drums or how you play anything, because it's what you think you're supposed to do versus what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's the most amazing, what the music wants you to do versus what you think you're supposed to do. The music always wins. And Ringo was all of them were.
That's another conversation that will be on our next episode, because as a session player, you have to confront that idea and that concept every time you go. Yeah, all the time. I mean, in a perfect world, we all would all the time. Live, you can get away with so much more than you can when you're recording. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that too. So let's we'll be in touch, man. I want to set up. We have a lot more ground to cover.
It's bet.
Yeah. All right. Kill it, man. Thanks so much. Yeah. We'll be in touch.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Sebastian.
How do I stop this crazy thing, by the way?
I don't know, but I'm going to use that as the outro.
Oh, all right.
Have a good one, man.
You too. I'm just going to walk out of frame.
All right. That was my talk with Sebastian Steinberg. Big shout out to Lawrence Ethan from episode 60 of the Bass Shed podcast. He was the one who connected me with Sebastian. Lawrence texted me one time. He's like, "Yo, man, there's a guy at the studio right now. I think you should talk to." I'm like, "All right, I'm down." And so Lawrence made it happen. So thank you, Lawrence, and check out episode 60 of the Bass Shed podcast, and check out Lawrence Ethan on Spotify. He has released a new tune. It's really cool. I like the new one. I got to have him back on the show to talk about this one. But big shout out to Lawrence for making this happen and connecting me and Sebastian. I appreciate that. Yeah. Big shout out there, buddy. Sebastian was great. I like what he had to say about transcribing, because I spent so much time transcribing. He's not anti-academic by any means, but that's just not, he's not academic first. And I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that, because I don't think academia is where music lives. I think music lives in the air, from people to touch them, not on paper. Yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that. Before I get long-winded again, I'm not going to continue talking about that. But I had a great time talking with Sebastian, and he will definitely be back on the podcast. If you are enjoying the Bass Shed podcast, please hit subscribe wherever you are listening to it. You can always stop by facebook.com/The Bass Shed, on Instagram @The Bass Shed, on Twitter @Bass Shed. I'm all those places. So those are all my social links, folks, and that's all I got for this one. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you on the next one in a minute.